What's up, everybody? Caster Crashcourse here, and today we're talking about Tengu. Tengu is by far the strangest deck I've seen in this game so far. I would have to say this is probably the hardest deck to pilot out of every deck that's come out, at least that I've covered so far, because it doesn't do one thing good. It does a lot of things some of the time. I would say that it is definitely a jack of all trades and an ace of none kind of deck, where your best plays come from what you have available to you at the time, not necessarily what else is in your deck. A lot of times when you're playing this deck, you have to look at your hand and figure out the most cost-effective way to accomplish your goals, especially in the fact that this deck is incredibly reliant on the ability to use caster effects. Opposed to a lot of decks where you're just going to keep turning casters sideways, this deck might only use 1 or 2 casters per turn for mana, and then use 3 or 4 plus for effects to make crazy combos happen. And I don't really know what else to say about it. It just does a lot of things really crazily. So let's go ahead and get into the list. So before we actually begin anything, I just want to go ahead and talk about some important facts about the Tengus that are in this deck. Tengus are broken down into 2 categories of 4 costs and 5 costs. Our 4 cost ones all have break, and in addition, they all do different things when they enter if they are played from anywhere but your hand, which is really important to keep in mind based off of some of the other effects in this deck. All of the 5 costs say that whatever their enter effect is, they give it to every other Tengu that comes into play while they're on the field. So there's a little bit of synergy there with that, and you can just have some really devastating plays. There's been plays where you can break 3 of your opponent's orbs on their turn. I've seen my opponent discard 6 cards from their hand in one of my turns. I've been able to play up to 3 orbs from my hand back to my orb zone with some of the crazy stuff this deck can do. It's just really good at nothing in particular. I know I already said that, but it's very interesting in how it plays. Additionally, as we actually get into the list, I know this is like a total side tangent right before I started to go into it, but all the Tengus have Bo Tengu 48 in their name, in addition to whatever their actual name is. I'm not going to be saying the Bo part, I'm just going to say what their actual name is and save myself some time, which I probably just wasted by doing this little intro, but I mean, whatever. It makes me feel better, and that's what's important. And yeah, so let's actually go ahead and get into the list now. So, starting off, we have 4 Dondoku. Dondoku is the level 4 yellow Tengu. When she comes into play, you draw a card, and if she's put into play from anywhere but your hand, you draw 2 cards instead. She's super good, and she's your play extender by far. I wouldn't say any less than 4 of this in any Tengu build, just because she's got a lot of synergy with the other yellow Tengu who's in this list. And also, she just lets you keep going, which is really important, because sometimes you end up having to just dig for answers. But I really like this card, and she's a 4 for sure. Next, we have 4 Sanjaku. Sanjaku is the green level 4. When she comes into play, she gives target resident servant minus 1,000 attack until the end of the turn. Unless she was put into play from not your hand, in which case she just returns them to your opponent's hand instead. Something that all of Tengus have, in addition to these enter effects and their break and whatnot, is all Tengus return to the bottom of the deck at the end of the turn that they came into play, which is important to remember because all of these level 4s or 4 costs have break, which means that if they get broken out of your orb zone, they go away at the end of your opponent's turn, and you won't have them on your next turn. So it's just something to keep in mind. She is not my favorite of the Tengus. We're playing 4 mostly because she's a break. And other than that, she's alright. Up next we have 4 Riku. She's also in here because she's a break, but unlike Sanjaku, she's just really good removal. When she comes into play from your hand, she also has break, and when she comes into play from your hand, you can rest target servant, or if she's put into play from anywhere else, you can destroy target servant instead. And that's non-specific, it's just any servant, and so that effect is just super good. So even though this is the only purple card in the deck, she's still worth running at a 4 of. Up next we have 4 Yakushi. She is my least favorite to play from hand, but my most favorite to play out of my orbs. When she comes into play not from your orbs, you get to corrupt an orb your opponent controls. But if she comes into play from just your hand, she just lets you look at one of your opponent's orbs, which is still a nice effect, but it's not as devastating as free destruction and like free life removal. So I like her. She's at a 4 of, and I don't think it should be played any other way. Moving on, we've got 2 Kozukura. This is our last break servant in the deck. When she comes into play, you can put a caster from your graveyard back into your hand, or if she was put into play from your orbs or graveyard, she puts them directly into play instead, which is super good. Being able to mana ramp and being able to snatch back casters that you lost earlier in the game is just really excellent. And but she's more situational than a lot of these other ones because you got to already have the casters. I mean the casters in your graveyard. So we're playing her at a 2 of. Moving on, we've got 3 Zenki. Zenki is like our own little Bomanon in that she lets us throw cards from our hand into our orb zone, which will let us trigger all of these guys instead of just having to play them from your hand. Additionally, she gives that effect to all Tengus you control, so you can potentially put up to 2 or 3 or more in your orb zone in a turn, and that just keeps you going and keeps you alive, and also makes your effects a lot more live and devastating to your opponent. And I think she's excellent. The only reason we're not playing her at 4 of is because her effect can be really depleting on your resources, and while you are getting them back, keep in mind that your Tengus do go away at the end of your opponent's turn if they come at break. And so we want to see her, but we don't want so many of her that we run out of cards in our hand. So up next we have 1 Corrin. Corrin is not my favorite Tengu. I think she's not bad, but the fact that she's in our colors means that she's probably worth playing, because even though Tengus are all 7 colors technically, but I'm not playing all 7 colors in here, and I think you should capitalize on the Tengus that do the most for your deck specifically, and not worry about the other ones, opposed to trying to cram them all in, because you're just going to ruin your synergy if that's the case. And that's why we're playing her, because she is in my predominant colors. But she can do some devastating stuff in the fact that whenever she comes into play, or when any Tengu comes into play while you control her, you can return a servant your opponent controls to the hand, which combined with a couple other Tengus can be like a really nasty board wipe. But it's not permanent removal, so I only like her at a 1 of. She's good for when she shows up. That's about it. Moving on, we have 2 Garen. Garen is crazy. This is one of the more devastating Tengus, but she does get situational as the game kind of progresses. So we're not playing her at an extensive number. I think the 2 is fine, because once you've seen 1, you should be set for the whole game. When she comes into play, or when any Tengu you control comes into play, you corrupt target orb, which is kind of crazy. Something that is really kind of funny, which I don't necessarily recommend, but, sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. She doesn't say corrupt target orb your opponent controls. So if you know for a fact that you have a Tengu in your orbs, you can just corrupt your own orb and then get your break effect on your turn, which is really interesting. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. But she can get really crazy. If you have her on your field and you play, I don't know, even 2 more Tengus, you are depleting 3 out of 7 of your opponent's life sources without even swinging. And so she can just get really nutty, and she can help you close out games kind of like in the mid to late game. She can close out on a turn if your opponent leaves her unchecked. And so she's just a really good Tengu. Moving on, we have 2. Nico Bow. Nico is really good in that she makes your opponent discards 2 cards whenever a Tengu comes into play. And so I like to usually use her and then follow up with a Garen, in that if your opponent's sitting on 3 or 4 cards in hand, you can just run their whole hand out immediately, and then use her and maybe another Tengu or 2 to clear off what your opponent has left on the board, so that they're basically just top decking to try and deal with you. And then on the following turn, you can drop Garen and maybe another Tengu or 2 and just kind of push for game. And she's really good. We want to see her, but kind of like Garen in that when you want to see her, but you don't want to see her crazy often. So we're playing her at a 2-of. Moving on to our Conjures, we have 2. Zero Motivation. Zero Motivation is a pretty cool card in this deck, in that you can use it defensively to keep your opponent's monsters away early game, because as you've seen, all of our monsters are 4-drops and 5-drops, so you can kind of protect yourself early. Or if you've got a big board of Tengus that you don't want to lose at the end of your turn, and you don't have any sort of casters to protect you in getting them back, you can use a Zero Motivation to get at least one of your casters back, one of your Tengus back, and then draw a card. And so it's definitely worth playing in here. Next we have 2, Swallow Whole. Swallow Whole is a really interesting card for this game. The fact that you have to banish a caster is not necessarily a really big deterrent from playing it in this deck. We are playing certain casters in this deck that make this card pretty live almost all the time. And so I like it as a 2-of. It lets you unclog yourself from certain things, which I'll get to when we get to our casters. But I do like it in here. I think it's good. Up next, we've got 2, Price of Overeating. Price of Overeating in this deck is not as good as it is in Magical Dream 7, but it is still a good card. There is a caster in specifics. It's Tart Chantilly, who works with both of these, but I'll get to that in just a second. It's not bad, but you don't need it as drastically as in Magical Dream, so we're only playing it as a 2-of. Moving on to our casters, we have 1, Rafina Soa. Rafina lets you go ahead and abuse the hell out of some of the crazy casters that are in this deck. This deck does have some of the strongest caster abilities that I've seen so far. You kind of just take the best of the best and shove them in here. And so there's no reason not to be playing her, since we're playing a pretty hefty amount of yellow. And so yeah. Next we have 1, Serenity Insania. Serenity is one of the best casters in this deck. Her effect to just tap and play an enter ability of target Tengu is super, super good. You can use it to make your opponent discard 2 more cards with Nico, or destroy another orb with either Yakushi or Garen. You can use it on your opponent's turn if it came in off of a break, and then get the good effect. Like, this card is just super, super good, and it's so strong. It's something that you read and you go, this card looks pretty good, and then you don't really realize how good it is until you've actually played with the deck, and then you go, I want this every game. Next we have Pulitzer Lata and Ayutthaya. I have them, I'm showing them both at the same time because they have the same effect. We're just playing 2 different names because with Tart Chantilly, who we're going to get to in just a second, you want to be able to get rid of them as fast as possible. And having 2 effects that are the same on 2 different names means that you're twice as likely to be able to have them both and get that effect off more than once. So, yeah. Next we've got 2, Shear Gray. Shear Gray is our mana fixer here in Tengus. She lets us go ahead and play Riku if you don't have... Because I'm not playing any purple casters. She lets you play Riku because she lets you, tap for whatever color for Tengu. In addition, we are playing a lot of green. So in general, she just has a lot of synergy with this deck. And I mean, she's one of the few casters I'm playing 2 of just because of how good she is. Next we have 1 Ran. This should come as no surprise. This is one of the best casters in the game. It also lets you recover some of your Tengus who are going to shuffle away to the bottom of your deck. And she just lets you kind of keep your plays going for the following turns. And there's no reason not to be playing her in this deck. Next we have 1 Tot Speed. Tot Speed is... We play a lot of orange in this deck, so we're playing a decent amount of orange casters. There's no reason not to be playing Top Speed if you are playing orange. With Zenki, you can go ahead and put her in your break zone if you don't want to cast her the turn you have her. And you can just kind of get that free mana ramp. And yeah, she's just good. Next we have 1 Nebula. Nebula is kind of one of these weird cards where she's never really had a purpose in the game before this. Because, I mean, at best she's synergized with like Ayutthaya. But now I think this deck is going to be like a really solid home for her. In that we are playing 2 Swallow Holes. So if you have her on your table, you can Swallow a Hole and sacrifice her. And then on the next turn just bring her back. And it's like you didn't lose any mana at all. And I think that's just really good. So I think she has a home in this deck. And I like her a lot in here. Next we have the caster that makes this deck possible. 4 Tart Chantilly. Tart is crazy. There's not too many decks that have cards that work like this. She has a continuous effect while she's in the grave that makes all Tengus you control cost 1 less, and they can't cost less than 1. So this card is your playmaker. You want to try and get ideally 3, but you can survive on 2 in your graveyard as soon as possible. That's why we're playing Price of Overeating. That's why we're playing Swallow Hole, especially Swallow Hole. Because if you open with one of these and a Swallow Hole, you can go ahead and use it for mana until you feel like you don't need it anymore, and then you can Swallow Hole it away, and you're just actually plussing yourself. And she's great. This card, without this card, I don't think this deck would be able to run as smoothly as it does. You would just be dead before you could get your first Tengu on the field. Next, we have 1 Irie. Irie is also good in this deck in that you can use her effect to mill 3, hoping to hit a Tart. Hitting Nebula is also pretty good because that means you can just hop her out of your grave when you get a chance to. Additionally, her effect to banish a servant and add a servant from your graveyard back to hand is super good in that you're going to lose your servants no matter what. All Tengus go away at the end of the turn. So it's definitely better to tap and sack that Tengu that you just swung with and got all your benefits out of. And then get either, if you have a different target in your graveyard, you can get back the same Tengu you just played, or a different Tengu if you only have one other card in your graveyard. Like, it's such a strong card, and since we are playing a lot of orange, this card is just super good. Next we have 1 Poly. Poly lets your Tengu stick around a little bit longer. She lets you cancel an automatic ability, so when your Tengus try and shuffle themselves away, you can tap her and be like, no, this one stays. But the problem with that is that they still go away at the end of your opponent's turn, so you really need to make the most out of which Tengu you're picking. A lot of times, you can use her with like Garen or Zenki and kind of leave them on the table, and then when your opponent hits the Tengus out of your breaks, they come into play and hurt your opponent on their turn. And if it's Zenki, it's kind of funny because it just makes all your Tengus replace themselves when they come out of the orbs. And you're going to lose it all at the end of the turn anyway, but you can make it work, and I think this card is super good in here. Plus with Rufina, you can save 2 Tengus. So, pretty nifty. Or at least save 1 twice, which sometimes is more important than saving 2. Next we have 1 Kiola Moringa. I'm not in love with this card, but I think she's not bad. She lets you sack her to search your deck for any Tengu and add it to your hand. So you can do some kind of crazy combos with like popping her off and then adding the pink one and then playing Zenki and then putting the pink one back into your orbs, and then like when that happens you can just fish her back out of your grave, and you're kind of cycling cards and keeping yourself in the game. And other than, I mean, she's got some other kind of okay plays. She's not my favorite caster in here, like I said, but she's definitely good enough to be playing at a 1 of. Next we have 1 Xian. Xian is super cool. I'm super glad that I get to actually play a Force of Will caster, because Medusa's not very good. Right now, anyway. That could change, but right now I don't see a point for it. And even originally reading this card, I wasn't sure what she was going to be super good for. But the fact that all your Tengu shuffle away to the bottom you can choose the order that they go to the bottom of your deck in. So you can put the one you care about the most on the very bottom, then type your Xian and just stack it back to the top, and then get it right back on the next turn when you draw, or when you activate an effect that lets you draw. You don't necessarily have to wait all the way to the next turn. And in this deck, I think she's super great. And lastly, we're playing one Ruby. Ruby is the pumper for Tengus. Sometimes that matters, sometimes it doesn't usually, but all your 4 costs are 1,000 1,000s. So every now and then you need that little extra boost if you just need to beat face with something. Other than that, she's mostly in here to be a third, technically, red source, because Shear Gray counts as a red source for Garen. And other than that, she's just a beater. But yeah. So like I was saying at the beginning of the video, as you can see, this deck, it does a lot of different things really crazy. And that's something that I think is really cool about Tengus. You can build them the way that you think works best. There's no necessarily right answer for this deck. There's not like 1 or 2 builds that are like, these are the ways you should play this deck. No, it's all 7 colors. It lets you do a lot of crazy stuff. And I think it's really neat. And I think it takes a lot of thinking, especially with what you're tapping and what you're not going to tap for Ether or for caster effects. It just takes a lot of practice. It's definitely a manageable deck, though. I wanted to go ahead and talk about some other cards that I think could be played in here that I didn't find room for, but that doesn't mean they're not a viability. Let's go ahead and talk about Invulnerable Body. Invulnerable Body in this deck is, I think it can be really funny. And not in like a cheesy kind of way, in like a pretty good kind of way. So let's say you've got a Garen bow in your grave, and you've got 2 Tengus in your orbs that you know of that you put there specifically. You can wait for your opponent to declare where their attack's going, and then chain the Invulnerable Body, flash in the Garen, pop an orb they control. When they hit the Tengu out of the orbs, you get another orb pop, plus you get that second body, which that one you can put in, I mean, you can put either of them in reverse mode, but like, it's just, it lets you do a lot of plays because all the Tengu say, if this card was put into play from anywhere but your hand. So casting them straight from the grave with a card like that still will trigger their effects, which is really cool. Another card that I think is really good in this deck is Ripple. I don't have a Ripple, or else I probably would be maining one. This deck sometimes has problems closing out games. You'll just spend a turn playing a bunch of cast Tengus, then pop 3-4 orbs off of a Garen or Yakushi with Serenity and Sania, and you get your opponent down to no orbs, but they've got this wall of defenders that you can't get around. It's nice to be able to just be like, oh, okay, I broke all your orbs, let's just play the Ripple from my hand and tribute the Ripple and win the game. And so it lets you kind of stealth around your opponent's field even more than you already can with some of these cool effects. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, feel free to leave me a like, or let me know what you think of this list down in the comments. If you enjoy my content, feel free to check out another video, or subscribe. I want to take a second to give a shout out to the Rogues Games. They gave me this playmat, and it's really cool. I like it a lot. It's very symmetrical, and I like their little logo up here. If you want to go check them out, I'll leave the link to their site down below. They are going to be selling caster singles soon, if not already. Definitely for Magical Girl Rising and Set 3, which a lot of the cards in this deck are from those. So why don't you guys go ahead and check them out. And I'll see you all in the next video. Have a good one.